Let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're looking at a massive breakthrough in mechanistic interpretability. We're talking about a development that is fundamentally changing how we understand and, more importantly, how we edit neural networks. For the longest time, the internal workings of AI have been treated like a total black box. You put data in, you get magic out, right? But recently, a fascinating new paper was accepted at the Mechanistic Interpretability Workshop, introducing something called targeted parameter decomposition, or TPD for short. We're going to explore exactly how this incredible technique allows us to finally perform precision surgery on AI models. Imagine a scenario that has honestly completely plagued researchers for years. You've got this massive AI model, and you've found a specific bug in its reasoning, or maybe it's memorized a harmful pathway. So how do you fix that one specific bug in the AI's brain without breaking all of its other knowledge? Historically, trying to tweak one thing often causes catastrophic forgetting somewhere else. It's kind of like trying to perform delicate brain surgery using a sledgehammer. But today, we're going to look at the scalpel that researchers have finally invented. Here is our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll start by peeking inside the AI black box. Then we'll tackle the parameter decomposition problem. After that, we'll introduce targeted parameter decomposition, look at the 7% revolution, dive into surgical ablation and rewiring, and finally, wrap up with the massive implications for the future of AI safety. Okay, let's start with section 1, inside the AI black box, and build some essential vocabulary. Before we can start taking an AI apart, we need to know what we're actually looking at. According to the Google ML glossary, parameters are the weights and biases that a model learns during training. If you have a neural network, this parameter space is essentially where all the knowledge, the logic, and the learned behaviors live. Recent research into weight-space learning treats this entire space not just as a random byproduct of training, but as a structured, learnable domain all on its own. And when we talk about modern AI, the large language models we interact with every day, we're almost always talking about transformers. The ML glossary defines a transformer as an architecture developed at Google, relying on self-attention mechanisms to transform a sequence of input embeddings. These things are massive. So the ultimate goal of mechanistic interpretability is to map specific computational circuits, or logic paths, across this giant weight space. Moving right along to section 2, the parameter decomposition problem, or the quadratic nightmare. Now there is a massive reality check we need to talk about. Standard parameter decomposition, or PD, has been the traditional way to try and split these networks into interpretable pieces. But standard PD assumes that every single weight could potentially contribute to a target function. Because of this, you have to decompose every layer and every single attention head just to reconstruct the behavior. The harsh reality? This decomposition graph scales quadratically with model size and context length. To quote AI News directly, "This quadratic scaling is exactly why standard PD is entirely impractical for modern architectures. It just demands prohibitively high computational resources." Because of this roadblock, researchers have been totally stuck. They've had to either rely on heavy approximations that aren't really accurate, or they restrict their analysis to tiny toy subnetworks that don't look anything like real-world AI models. Which brings us to section 3, targeted parameter decomposition, the elegant solution to this computational nightmare. Here's where it gets exciting. TPD introduces a new structural prior, the idea that not all weights are actually relevant for every task. Here is how it works under the hood. First, you input the specific prompts or subtasks you care about. Then, and this is the absolute genius part, it routes all the non-target data through a high-rank catch-all component. By letting this catch-all just absorb the irrelevant data, the optimization process is concentrated strictly on the target circuit. You are beautifully isolating exactly what you want to look at. And by isolating these specific circuits, TPD allows us to perform ablation with incredible precision. Going back to our glossary, ablation is a technique for evaluating a component's importance by temporarily removing it. You pull it out, run the model, and see if performance drops. With TPD, because we've isolated the exact circuit, we can surgically remove or test a component without any guesswork and without the catch-all absorbing spurious correlations. Actually, the catch-all ends up acting as a regularizer. Let's hit section 4, the 7% revolution. This is where the efficiency gains are just mind-blowing. Okay, let this number sink in for a second. 7%. The researchers validated RTPD on transformer language models trained on the PILE dataset. In one very specific experiment on a 4-block transformer, they successfully extracted a CSS-only submodel. And doing this incredible extraction required only 7% of the compute, the flops, required by previously published full decomposition methods. That represents a staggering 93% reduction in flops. While standard PD demands massive, sprawling resources, targeted PD takes just a tiny sliver of compute. By pruning the decomposition graph by design and focusing gradients exclusively on relevant pathways, TPD saves absolutely massive amounts of GPU hours. What this really means for the industry is that iterative circuit analysis isn't just a luxury for giant tech companies anymore. It is now completely feasible on consumer hardware or much smaller clusters. Moving to Section 5, surgical ablation and rewiring. Let's see what we can actually do with this. So what happens when developers scale this up? We know about the compute efficiency, but the surgical modification is where the real magic happens. The researchers scaled this up to a 12-block transformer and proved they could surgically ablate and rewire memorized sequences. And the best part? They did this with negligible side effects on other inputs. Plus, because that catch-all component acts as a regularizer, the authors reported highly reproducible and mechanistically faithful circuits across multiple experimental runs, which solves a huge sensitivity issue we've seen in past research. For the builders and developers tuning in, here are your crucial takeaways. First up, TPD is a research tool for analysis and modification. It is not an inference optimizer to make your runtime faster, because that catch-all component still requires forward passes. Second, your input specification is critical. The decomposition only isolates what you explicitly define. Third, while side effects are indeed minimal, you absolutely still must validate your modified submodels on held-out data. And finally, it integrates seamlessly into existing interpretability pipelines without needing you to change the underlying architecture. And finally, Section 6, the future of AI safety and real-world applications. Ultimately, this all comes back to AI safety. Traditional methods like standard fine-tuning or prompt engineering impact the entire weight space. They're kind of like blunt instruments. But because TPD allows us to do precision surgery instead of an invasive autopsy, we can directly manipulate internal mechanisms. We can disable harmful memorized pathways, say if an AI memorizes sensitive personal data, or we can correct specific reasoning bugs without degrading the foundation model's overall performance. We can finally extract circuits, independently inspect them, and deploy them safely. I want to leave you with a final thought to spark your curiosity. We've officially moved from treating neural networks as opaque, scary black boxes to highly structured spaces that we can map, isolate, and rewire efficiently. If the computational bottleneck of quadratic scaling is really gone, and we can isolate and edit logic for a mere fraction of the cost, the era of truly editable, deeply understandable AI isn't some distant sci-fi future. It is already here. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.